I'm going to read to you now my new horror novel, Whistlers. This will be available July 1st. The hard copy will be available then. If you want to get the paperback early, give me a message and I'll send you the link. But July 1st is when it will be officially released to socials. So this is my newest published horror novel, and I hope you enjoy. I'm going to be reading the first 2 chapters. Morning, Nacho, my favorite customer. Who's a good boy? Linda leaned out the drive-through window into the fragile blue hour before sunrise, her voice lively enough to stir the stillness. Steam drifted from the coffee cup in Ron's hand, curling upward before dissolving into the cool air. She held up a bone-shaped biscuit with playful ceremony. Nacho shifted forward immediately, his long bloodhound ears sliding over the edge of the seat. His tail thumped against the interior panel in steady percussion. A hopeful murmur rose from his throat as he studied the treat with complete and unfiltered devotion. When Linda extended her hand, he accepted it with surprising grace, teeth careful, eyes bright with gratitude that required no language. Excuse me. He's an absolute darling, she said. Ron smiled, the expression settling naturally across a face shaped by decades of mountain wind and lake glare. He's got it figured out. Turn on the charm, and breakfast shows up. His laugh carried warmth without effort. He took a slow sip of coffee, letting the bitterness wake him fully. Have a good one, Nacho. You too, Ron. She reached to rub the dog's head, fingers disappearing briefly into loose folds of velvet skin. Sorry, I already said that. Thanks, Linda. We're heading out early. Thought I'd beat the crowd for once. Hope you do. She slipped him one more biscuit before retreating inside. It was now 5:37 a.m. The first suggestion of sunlight began pressing at the edge of the horizon, stretching pale bands of amber across Kiskway, British Columbia. Storefront windows caught the glowing light. Porch steps gleamed faintly with dew. The town remained quiet, held in that suspended moment before engines turned over and doors opened for the day. Ron had never desired anything beyond its boundaries. He knew which houses kept their porch lights on all night and which driveways iced first in winter. He knew the bend in the river where salmon stalled each fall. He understood the silence that settled over the town during heavy snowfall when even sound seemed to move carefully. Leaving had never appealed to him. Travel meant noise, strangers, impatience. Here, time unfolded at a tolerable pace. He eased the truck forward. Gravel shifted beneath the tires as they rolled away from the cafe. The town thinned quickly, buildings surrendering to stretches of open road. Tall evergreens began to crowd the highway, their dark trunks rising in disciplined rows. Shadows lingered between them longer than they should have, pockets of dimness resisting the advancing light. Nacho rested his chin near the window, smelling the new scents filtering in. Cold earth, distant water, resin from cut timber somewhere far off. His ears fluttered when Ron lowered the glass a few inches. The air carried a faint humidity that hinted at coming warmth later in the day. Ron adjusted the radio but left it off. He preferred the quiet at this hour. The engine's steady hum and the rhythmic passing of painted lines were enough. Fishing had always been less about catching and more about claiming space before anyone else could. The honey hole lay just outside town, tucked in a shallow bend of shoreline, partially shielded by brush. He had discovered it years earlier by accident and had guarded its location with stubborn pride. Lately, others had begun finding it too. That bothered him more than he liked to admit. Some things should remain earned, not stumbled upon. The forest grew denser as they climbed. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the canopy in places, leaving stretches of road washed in a muted gray that felt cooler than the surrounding air. The lake would be visible soon, a widening shimmer through the trees. Ron tightened his grip slightly on the steering wheel without realizing it, anticipation sharpening his focus. Mornings like this carried a quiet promise. A man, his dog, open water, and the possibility of something pulling back from the depths. Still, as the truck rounded the final curve toward the descent, an unfamiliar stillness pressed against the windshield, subtle, nearly imperceptible, yet present enough to register somewhere beneath thought. The woods stood motionless. No breeze disturbed the upper branches. Even the usual scatter of early birds seemed absent. Ron exhaled slowly and told himself it was nothing, just another morning. He drove on. The truck rattled over gravel, tires crunching against the narrow clearing that ran along the lake's edge. The sun had climbed higher now, spilling pale amber across the water, glinting on a thin ribbon of mist that hovered above the surface. As the truck rounded the last bend, Ron's eyes fell on the shoreline. There it was, unmistakable. Jay's faded blue Dodge, sitting like a flag painted in the quiet morning. "Son of a bitch never sleeps," Ron said, teeth gritted, watching him already standing at the tailgate, cooler lid open, arms resting lazily on the edge as if the fish were trophies he had wrested from the water. "Morning, Ron," Jay called, voice carrying easily across the still air. "You're late to the party. They were biting early." Nacho barked sharply from the passenger seat, low and insistent, almost urgent. Ron swung open his door and stepped out. "Looks like he cleared them all," he said evenly, scanning the fish stacked in ice. Jay's grin widened, just the right shade of smug, and he lifted one trout briefly before dropping it back into the cooler. "What bait?" Ron asked. "Marshmallows," Jay replied, easily, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. "Pink ones. Works every time." Ron gave a short... let me say that again. Ron gave a short nod, moving to his own spot along the water. The stretch of shoreline had once been his alone, a reward earned through years of early mornings, patience, and quiet vigilance. Now it was claimed by anyone willing to rise before dawn. Jay slammed the cooler shut with a hollow thunk and climbed into his cab. "Better luck tomorrow," he shouted over the engine, turning it over with a low rumble. "Early bird gets the worm." Gravel spat beneath the tires as the Dodge climbed the slope, and dust hung in the air, catching the morning light. Music erupted from the speakers, slicing through the calm, leaving only a thin ribbon of quiet in his wake. "Early bird gets the worm. Fucking asshole," Ron exhaled. Slowly, shoving his hands into his pockets of his jacket, he opened his tackle box, lifting the container of night crawlers. The damp, earthy scent rose faintly, the worms wriggling slowly inside, some sluggish, fading after a few days in storage. He shifted through them with careful precision, selecting the liveliest ones and threading them onto the hooks. The process was methodical. Add weight, twist the line, test the tension. He adjusted each hook, flicked the line between his fingers, inspected each worm. The quiet morning allowed him to focus, the rhythm of preparation calming a small ritual before the final first cast. Sorry. Let me say that again. Sometimes I will trip up. I'm not perfect. The quiet morning allowed him to focus, the rhythm of preparation calming, a small ritual before the first cast. Time passed in this steady way, punctuated by the occasional splash of water along the shore or the soft scrape of a pebble beneath his boots. Ron murmured to himself as he worked. The irritation of waking early only to find the prime spot taken. Nacho wandered a few feet away, sniffing and circling, but always returning to a glance at Ron for guidance. Then he heard it, a faint whistle. High-pitched and fleeting, coming from somewhere deep in the trees. Ron froze, cocking his head. It was gone as quickly as it arrived. He shook his head and returned to the task of threading new worms, telling himself it was probably a bird or the wind moving through the pines. He added another weight, checking the tension on the line again. Another worm, carefully skewered. The line ran smooth between his fingers, hooks aligned, ready. Another faint whistle drifted through the air. He paused again, scanning the tree line. Only the usual glint of sunlight on the water, and an occasional ripple where a fish had nudged the shallows. Ron muttered under his breath, shaking it off, and continued. Cast after cast, new worm after new worm, weight checked, knot tightened, line threaded through the guides with precision. The lake lay still and silent beyond him, each splash and rustle magnified in the quiet morning. Ron knelt at the edge of the lake. Nacho sat nearby, nose twitching, ears flicking at sounds too faint for human ears, eyes fixed on the tree line where mist curled between the pines like living smoke. Pale sunlight crept across the water, brushing shadows into shapes that didn't belong, stretching the ordinary into something subtly wrong. The air smelt wet and earthy, but beneath it, a sour rot that curled into his gut, prickling at nerves he didn't know were exposed. He forced himself to finish casting, letting the line ripple across the lake's glassy surface. Another whistle followed. Longer, wavering, bouncing in impossible directions. He paused mid-motion, stomach tightening, senses screaming. Nacho stiffened, ears flat, tail rigid, and barked sharply. Insistent, urgent. Ron followed, the dog's gaze into the forest and saw it. Two glowing points flicking between the trunks. Bright, unnatural, unblinking. A shiver ran down his spine, and his stomach twisted. He tried to steady himself. More whistles rose, irregular, teasing, bouncing across the lake, echoing between the pines. Ron's hand shook, night crawlers writhing in his fingers, and Nacho barked again, yipping and circling, insistent, pulling toward the tree line. His chest tightened as he realized fully this was no bird, no normal sound. Something patient and intelligent was out there, and it was aware of them. The smell hit them, crawling into his nostrils, thick and sour, fouler than anything he'd ever known, twisting in his stomach and making bile rise. Ron froze, eyes darting to the trees, to the flickering orange glows that moved closer, reflecting in wet bark, in rocks, in shadows that didn't belong. Another whistle, closer now, cutting through the air with cruel precision, bouncing from trunk to trunk, untraceable. Nacho barked again, yipped, and lunged toward the brush, pressing against the unseen hackles raised, ears flat. Ron's chest heaved, pulse hammering, every nerve screaming. He called out in panic, "Nacho!" Then something hit Ron from behind, sudden, impossible, crushing down his spine, bending him forward into the dirt. Nacho yipped and barked, flung violently into the brush, disappearing into shadows, unmoving. Ron screamed, limbs flailing, hitting roots and branches as pain lanced through every nerve. The whistles continued, relentless, vibrating the air and pressing against him from every direction. A shove hurled him into the trees, trunks snapping against ribs, bones cracking under the force. Fire and ice shot through his body as he landed among rocks and undergrowth. The shadow released him into nothingness, vanishing as though it had never existed. Ron lay sprawled and mangled. The last thing he saw before the world snapped to black was the gigantic hairy hand lunging towards his face. Whatever it was, it moved with impossible strength and precision, ripping Ron's head clean from his shoulders in a single, horrifying motion. It tossed the bloody head into the water, watching it float like a grotesque crimson apple bobbing in the ripples. The creature lingered at the water's edge, eyes fixed on the head as though savoring the terror, the dark, impossible shape of it standing perfectly still against the mist and trees. Then it let out a long, sharp whistle that sliced through the morning air, mocking, deliberate, and full of an intelligence no human was meant to hear. That is the ending of the first chapter, the first prologue. We are now going to go on to chapter 1. I'm just going to pause this music here for a moment, take a quick little hydration. I hope you're enjoying the read. A couple stutters here and there, we're not perfect. Chapter 1. The funeral had been a slow, aching procession, each step through the churchyard pressing into him like stones in his chest. People whispered around him, their words soft and hollow, offering condolences that felt like air against a wound that would never close. Faces blurred as he walked behind the casket, familiar and unfamiliar alike, all carrying pity he did not want. Leslie had always been a light spilling into every corner, and now the world was dimmer for it. Her absence was tangible, like a weight pressing against his ribs, a quiet emptiness that settled into his lungs. He nodded at those who came, offered shallow murmurs of thanks, yet each movement felt like it required the strength of every fiber in him. His heart had been hollowed long before the casket left the room, and still every step forward tore at it again. When the mourners finally left, spilling back into their lives while he remained tethered to hers, Cole sank to the floor of the hallway, shoulders folding under the weight of grief that had not lessened, only sharpened with time. The house was quiet, unbearably quiet, each shadow stretching longer than it had any right to. He clutched at the air as if he could pull her back into it, anything to feel the brush of her presence, the warmth of her hand on his skin. His mind returned unbidden to the hospital, to her gripping his hand so tightly it had hurt, to the strained effort in her eyes as she tried to form words she could not speak. He had whispered then, voice broken, trembling, "I know it hurts, but soon no more pain. I love you, Leslie." She had looked at him, tears streaking down her cheeks, and for the briefest moment, their eyes held together the weight of all the love they had shared, fragile and impossible to save. And then she had passed, leaving only the echo of her grip, the hollow ache of absence that could not be filled. The house seemed to close in around him, walls pressing him to the floor, carrying the scent of her favorite candles, her shampoo, the faint lingering aroma of her presence that was no longer there. Each photograph, every small object was a tether to the past that he could not touch. The liquor he poured did little to dull the edge of it now. The burn was fleeting, a reminder that nothing could fill the empty space she had left behind. He wandered from room to room, tracing the curve of her favorite chair, the books she had loved, the faint marks of where her hand had rested on the windowsill, desperate to keep something tangible of her alive. Memory and grief collided in every corner. The echo of her laughter in the hallway was a cruel mimicry, sweet for a heartbeat and then gone, leaving only emptiness and longing. He tried to cling to his routines, the thin structures of breakfast, coffee, and the spinning of the vinyl, but even ritual had become an act of survival rather than comfort. He ate slowly, sometimes weeping into the napkin, sometimes holding his head in his hands, feeling the world shift under the weight of a grief too vast to name. Nights were worse. Sleep brought vivid, fractured dreams of her body failing, of her eyes pleading with him, of the hand that had gripped his almost too tight, as if she needed him to hold on for both of them. He would wake in the darkened living room, trembling, the bottle at his side, a weak and fleeting barrier against the pain that would not relent. The memory of her lips whispering nothing, the tears streaking her face, remained lodged in him, a permanent scar. He stayed long into the night, letting the shadows stretch. The music fade, the air pressed close. The house had become a mausoleum, yet alive with memory, alive with the echo of what had been and could never have been again. He sat on the floor, clutching the photograph of her on the beach, feeling rough edges of the frame through his fingers, tracing the curve of her smile, imagining the warmth of her skin against his own. The night outside was silent, but for the faint hum of the wind through the trees, the occasional car in the distance, a quiet world that had moved on without her. He let himself shiver, let the tears come unbidden, allow the grief to wash over him, understanding that there was no quick reprieve, no forgetting, only survival through the ache, through the weight of a love that death had not diminished. That Tuesday morning, Cole woke to a familiar haze, the dull ache behind his eyes pressing like a second heartbeat he could not escape. The world through the living room window was blurred, sunlight slicing through dust and motes suspended in the air like tiny stars caught mid-fall. His recliner held him with the weight of all that remained of the life had been known, a body and spirit wrapped in the long shadow of grief. Sleep had abandoned him years ago, and the nights were restless, haunted by absence and the echo of a voice he would never hear again. 3 years had passed since Leslie's death, and the house had become a hollow shrine to memory, every room steeped in her presence yet devoid of her warmth. He had left the police force shortly after she died, retreating into the silence that now pressed against him like a tide. The liquor he clutched each morning dulled the pain only for moments, a cruel balm that reminded him of what had lost, a cruel balm that reminded him of what had been lost. On some nights he had come dangerously close to surrendering entirely. The weight of his own hands and the memory of her smile, almost enough to end it all. Almost. The sun poured through the window, sharp and pale, catching the tiny particles floating in the still air. Cole squinted, groaning as he pushed the recliner back, feeling the familiar resistance under his hands. The bottle of Crown Royal waited on the side table like an old confidant, the amber liquor promising momentary escape. Behind it, a photograph of Leslie on the beach caught the light. Her smile radiant, hair tousled by wind that only existed in memory. He lifted the frame carefully, kissed the glass if he could somehow carry his love back to her, and placed it on the kitchen table. The sight of her face was both solace and dagger, a reminder of what had been taken and what could never return. Breakfast was both ritual and penance. 2 eggs, bacon, toast, and a cup of coffee, too hot to taste. He ate, speaking only in the quiet language of memory, Deep down, he understood the permanence of this pain. It had become a part of him, a constant and unyielding as the sun rising each morning. On the mornings when hangovers pressed hardest, when the ache threatened to consume him entirely, he looked at the photograph, and for a heartbeat, the memory of that day on the beach returned, the sun warming their skin, wind teasing the edges of her hair, laughter unburdened by illness, untouched by the inevitability of what was to come. That brief moment of reprieve hit him like a wave, then the current pulled him under again, leaving him heavier than before. He reached for the vinyl next, Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here, the one record that could touch the raw places inside him. Dropping the needle, the opening chords filled the room, resonating in his chest, vibrating through the bones of his grief. He closed his eyes, letting the melody carry him, and for a moment she was there again, her hand on his shoulder, the press of her head against him, comforting without words, reminding him that the bond had not been entirely severed. He swayed slightly, caught in a dance that existed only in the intersection of memory and longing, a quiet communion with the spirit that refused to leave. For a few minutes, the house breathed again, worn by a presence that had never truly gone, alive in the echoes and shadows, in light caught on the floor, in the hum of the music that threaded the past and present together. The knock came, three hard thuds, sharp enough to make the brass knocker ring faintly against the door frame. Cole froze mid-step, hand halfway to the fridge, breath catching in his throat. That wasn't a neighborly knock, not the kind folks in town used when dropping off pie or asking a favor. That was the kind a man used whenever he had to say couldn't wait. The kind that carried weight in the space between each strike. The house was dim, except for the flicker from the living room, and the sudden disturbance made the shadows along the floor seem to scramble like startled insects. Cole wiped his palms on his sweatpants before moving toward the door. His steps felt tight, measured, as though the air itself had thickened and grown syrupy around him. We're gonna wait for this. Good old ambulance. Where was I? When he reached the handle, he paused, listening not for another knock, but for something else, something behind the knock. Cole drew a breath and opened the door. Deputy Lee Carter stood under the porch light, hat held against his chest like it was the only thing keeping his hands busy. Sorry, I just want to get the theme music back on here. Shit's getting serious now. His shoulders were slumped, not with exhaustion, but with something heavier, shock, grief, dread, maybe all three hammered into one solid weight. His patrol cruiser idled behind him, headlights staring blankly into the gravel driveway like a pair of unblinking eyes. Deputy Carter, Cole said, voice catching on the second word, something about Carter's expression, an unsettling mixture of sorrow and disbelief, made Cole's heart twist. Cole was not a dramatic man. Sorry, Carter. I don't know why I say Cole. Carter was not a dramatic man. He didn't show his feelings on his sleeve. Didn't let things shake him unless they were damn well worth being shaken by. Tonight, his face looked carved from worry. Evening, Cole, Carter murmured. He twisted the hat slowly between his hands like he needed the movement to stay grounded. Sorry to come by so early. I know this ain't exactly the hour folks care to see lawmen at their door, but He trailed off, jaw tightening. His eyes flicked past Cole towards his cruiser, then back. There's something I gotta tell you, and I don't want to do it over the phone. Cole swallowed, throat dry. You're making me nervous, Carter. What's going on? Carter shifted his weight, boots scraping against porch boards. Mind if we sit? He asked quietly, motioning toward the wooden patio swing. It'd be better sitting down. The way he said it, the heaviness in his voice, made Cole's skin prickle. People only asked to sit when the conversation was about to knock the wind out of someone. Cole nodded stiffly. Yeah, all right. He stepped aside so Carter could walk over to the swing. Carter followed, standing near the railing, but close enough to intervene if needed. His eyes narrowing with a suspicion he wasn't bothering to hide. Carter lowered himself onto the swing, the chains rattling softly as he sat. The swing swayed once gently, like it recognized the tension and didn't dare move too far either direction. Cole sat beside him, the wood coal beneath him, and the quiet between them stretched until it felt like another presence on the porch, a heavy one, thick with something unspoken. Carter cleared his throat, wiping the back of his hand across his mouth. Cole, I'm afraid this isn't easy. It's something you're gonna want to hear, but I'd rather you hear from me rather than someone else gossiping around town. He glanced down at his hat, turning it into his hands again, the brim bent under his grip. Your buddy Ron? Cole felt his pulse jump painfully under his ribs. What happened to him? His voice was barely above a whisper now. Carl inhaled deeply, held it, exhaled slow. Cole, he was found. There was a long pause, the kind stretches out far enough to feel like a cliff edge, down by the fishing hole. Cole stared hard at Carter, waiting, dreading the next words, his heart pumping in slow, heavy beats that felt like they were shaking his whole chest. Found? He said. Why are you saying it like that? Carter scrubbed his face, looked towards the woods. Because his voice faltered. Because it wasn't normal. It wasn't a normal scene, Cole. Cole's hands tightened on his knees. What do you mean? Carter opened his mouth and closed at it again, as if casting the words and deciding they needed reshaping before they could be spoken. He looked back at Cole with a deep, aching sadness. I just need you to brace yourself, alright? Cole let out a slow, sharp breath. Brace myself for what? Carter's eyes stayed fixed on the dark tree line, the river murmuring faintly beyond the trees. Cole, it's bad. Worse than anything we've ever seen before. Ron, they found him near the fishing hole, and his voice faltered, caught somewhere between fear and disbelief. Cole leaned forward on the swing, hands gripping worn wood. And? Carter pressed his palms against his knees. His head. It was in the water. Cole's stomach lurched. What the hell does that mean? Carter's hands gripped the chains of the swing. I'm telling you this now so you don't have to go see it for yourself. Not yet. The rest, his arms, legs, even his midsection, stacked, placed high in the trees near the bank, like someone wanted it to be seen, like some sick message. Cole's cigarette trembled in his hand, smoke curling upward, but he didn't bring it to his lips. Stacks? He whispered. You're saying in the trees? Carter nodded slowly, face paled under the porch light, each piece set so it could be seen from the bank. His head left floating in the water, just staring up. There's a pattern to it, something deliberate, almost ritualistic. Nobody knows why, nobody knows who. Cole's eyes went wide, staring towards the woods. Jesus Christ! How can someone do that? Carter rubbed the back of his neck. We don't know yet. Worse, there's almost nothing else left behind. No footprints, no drag marks, no weapon. We're combing every inch of the bank, checking for prints, fibers, anything that might give us a lead. Nothing so far. Everything else, gone. Clean. Cole drew in a sharp breath, letting it hiss between his teeth. So it's like they just took him apart and left it? No trace? Nothing? Exactly. Carter's voice was clipped. And the structures in the trees, they're not random. Branches bent, tied in ways that hold the limbs like they're stacked in shelves, almost like scaffolding. Whoever did this knew what they were doing, planned every inch. It ain't a grizzly. It's beyond anything we've ever seen in this county, or anything I know. Cole leaned back, swing tilting under him. The morning dew felt heavy, pressing in from all sides. River murmuring faintly, wind tugging leaves across the porch. And nobody? No prints? No witnesses? Nothing? Carter shook his head slowly. Nothing. We've got men everywhere checking the area, looking for fibers, traces of DNA, anything that might point to a person. The whole site's photographed, documented, measured, but so far no leads. It's just like he appeared like that, or someone wanted it to seem that way. Cole exhaled slowly, smoke curling in thin strands toward the trees. Jesus, stacked in the trees, head in the water, arms and legs arranged, and nobody knows who? His voice trailed off, caught between disbelief and rage. Carter's hands rested lightly on Cole's shoulder. That's why I'm telling you. You don't need to step foot into that horror show. Telling you is enough. Not today, not until we know more. We're doing everything we can. Photographs, prints, the whole investigation. But he shook his head. This one's different, man. Nobody's prepared for this. Cole nodded, letting the words settle. The swing creaked under their weight. Then, not far off, the woods. Let's take the paragraph over one more time. Cole nodded, letting the words settle. The swings creaked under their weight. Then, not far off, the woods murmured a whistle behind the pines. If you enjoyed this read, don't mind my stumbles and me getting emotional. I think so far you're gonna really enjoy the rest of this book. It gets way more intense, and I'm sorry for getting a little emotional, but yeah, I really think you guys are gonna like the rest of this book. If you wanna read more, you can buy it on Amazon. Sorry, my nervous system is rattled a little bit. Yeah, what a roller coaster of emotions. Wow. Whistlers is available on Amazon if you want to buy it. I will leave a link below. Thank you guys for sticking around and supporting me. This is why I continue to do it. So get your copy of Whistlers today. Peace and love, everybody. How do you shut this thing off?